My name's Philip Jones and I'm the author of Quart and Quart-Schema, and today I'm going to show you in this video tutorial how to build a RESTful API using Quart-Schema. This API will be a CRUD API, yes, which means it will be able to create, read, update and delete a resource. And for this example today, that resource is going to be a to-do. This is because pretty much all the front-end tutorials I've seen and played with, especially for React, talk about to-do items. So it makes sense, I think, to build an API for that. So if you want to, before we start, if you want to find out a bit more about me, I'm pgjones.dev. You can find all the projects, and a link to this video will be placed on the menu here. Okay, let's begin. So today I'm going to use Python 3.90. I think the latest is 3.91, but if you have Python 3.7 or better, then this will work for you as well. Okay, so let's start by creating a virtual env. And there we go. And then let's create a file. So I'm going to call it a to-do app. Or maybe the to-do API actually. Let's call it the to-do API. And I'm going to do a quick Quart example. So like a quick start for Quart. So first, let's install Quart. While that's installing, to do a very basic Quart app, we need to import the Quart class itself, then initialize it with the name. Then we can create a root, which will be the index root to begin with. Let's type it as well, and we'll just return hello. Okay, that's all we need to do there. So to run it, we just tell Quart where it is by assigning to the environment variable Quart app the name of the file or the module, which is to do API, then the name of the app instance, which is app. Then we can run Quart run. Excellent, that's working. So if I copy this and go here, perfect. Now if I change it, it should reload. That's not how you spell hi. Let's try that. Excellent. So there we go. So now we have a very quick Quart app serving just a very simple root that just says hi. So the next thing we want to do, I think, is set up the database. So the database is going to store the to-dos in. We need to store them somewhere if we're going to be able to update them. For me, my database of choice is always Postgres. So I've already set up a Postgres user called to-do and a database called to-do that has no relations in. So you'll need to do that yourself or choose a different database. And I'll come to that in a second, because we're going to use a package called databases to connect to the database. I think this is quite a good package to do for in the async space, and it's maintained by Encode that do a lot of great work. So let's install that with the Postgres drivers. It will be the same interface. Well, the databases API is the same for whichever, just different drivers. So if you prefer a different database type, just choose that. Oops, wrong terminal. Go back to this one. So install databases. So now I want to create a connection. So I import a database, use the connection string, and then connect. Excellent. So let's create a function to do that. Oops, create db connection. This is going to return a database which I need to import from databases. Import database. Is it databases? Yes. Okay. Visual Studio will catch up when it's installed. So db equals database. I think instead of hard coding it here, I'm going to put it into the config. This will allow us to change the database location in production. So this is much better. So the URL locally should be PostgreSQL. The username is to-do. There's no password at localhost 5432, which is default port, and then the databases to do. So that looks good. So we created the database. Now we need to connect, and then return the DB. So now I have a function to create a DB connection, and I've installed databases. So now what I'd like to do is run a schema to actually create the relations, the tables in the database. So let's create a schema file, and what I want to do is create a table called to-dos. And what makes up a to-do? Well, I think it needs an ID, especially if we're going to, in the API, update it. We need to be able to reference it. So this is serial, which is a Postgres type, which basically means it's an integer that auto increments, and it's the primary key. We want to know whether it's complete or not. Oops. So let's store that as a boolean. Let's not allow it to be null, and let's set the default to false, i.e. it is not complete. Let's say it's a due date, which is a timestamp with a time zone, but that can be null. Let's make that optional. Not all to-dos have to have a due date. And a description of the task, which I could call description, but I'll just call it task. It should be text, and that should not be null. Great. And then, because I want to run this this schema file over and over again and wipe the database and recreate it, because this is development, I can add to the top, drop the table if it exists, to-dos. Perfect, so that drops it, then creates it. Okay, so now we need a command that we can run to do that. And by tradition with Flask and Quart, you call it something like initdb. So Quart initdb is what I want to run. If I try that now, it will say it can't, there's no command. I can go add it. So to do this in Quart, I add a command to the CLI called initdb. Initdb. There we go. Now the downside is you'll note that this is synchronous, and this is a limitation of click at the moment, which Quart and Flask use underneath. So because of that, I'm going to create an inner function that is asynchronous, put all my async code there, and then use asyncio to run that within the sync function. So I just add it like this, and then I go asyncio.run inner. So now when I call this, it will run the inner. And this inner has got to create the database connection. Then it needs to load the schema file, which I can use using the open resource method. So open resource will open a file in the same location as the app itself, i.e. this module, which is great because it means I don't have to worry about absolute or relative paths. So I've loaded it in, and now I can do db.execute. That looks like the right one. I was going to look back at the documentation, but it comes up. File.read. So that should do it. So now if I call this command, it's going to run the inner function. The inner function is going to create a database to this URL, load the file, which is that one, and execute it. Okay, let's see if that works. Oops, I always forget to await. Let's try it again. Cannot insert multiple commands. So this has got two commands, so I need to split those up. So I can do that easily. I can say for command file.read.split. So the commands always end with a semicolon, so I can do that. And I can change this to command. And that should work. And it has. Let's go check the database. Excellent. So now there's a to-dos table. We have everything we expect. Great. Okay. Let's go back and run the app. So now we can start working on the routes themselves. So first, let's just create and return some information about the database in this index route we've already got. So to do that, I need to decide when to create the DB connection. And Quart has a before serving decorator. And what this does is it will guarantee that this coroutine function is called before Quart serves any requests. So it's a really good place for us to put the database onto the app itself. So some people like to store the database in other places. I like to store it on the app. I think that's quite useful. The downside is I think it will mess up the typing, but I can fix that later on. But now the app exists. So now we can, let's say, get the count of to-dos, which would be await app.db. Maybe I can get the typing right if I do this, app.db database. Let's see whether it understands it now. No. Oh well. App.db.fetch file. Let's see what it's called. There's a fetch all. Looks like it's got an underscore. Let's check the documentation. Fetch underscore val. There we go. Okay, let's do that. So fetch val. Select count star from to-dos. Perfect. There are count to-dos. To-dos. I really like F strings. I think that's very, very concise and clear. Right, let's see if that's worked. There are 0 to-dos, which makes sense. Perfect. Okay, now we can start to think about the actual RESTful API. So this API needs to create, which in a RESTful sense would be the post route, read, the get route, update, a put route, although it could be a patch, but I'm going to use put. I'm going to update the entire resource. It's only a very simple resource anyway. And delete, which is the delete route, delete method. So let's get that going. Let me first install Quart-Schema. So Quart-Schema, well, this video is all about using Quart-Schema, and the reason to use Quart-Schema is it actually makes it much easier to validate the data you're passing into the API and returning from the API, and as I'll show you in a second, it creates automatic documentation for you using that. So let's get going. So pip install Quart, can't spell, schema. Okay, let's run the app again. Excellent. So let's start with the create. So app.root to-dos, so the to-dos resource, methods equals post. Okay, sync def create to-do. Well, this one obviously has to take some data and it needs to return a to-do. I need to define that, so it takes in some to-do data and returns a to-do. So these have to be different because the to-do data is going to be a subset. And the reason that it is because the ID for the to-do comes from the database. So you'll see it in a second, but basically we can't pass in a full to-do object, we can only pass in part of it. So let's do that, and it'll be clear, I hope. So from pydantic.data classes import data class. So Quart-Schema allows you to use the pydantic data classes or the base model, and I much prefer the data class. I think it's very clean and clear. So let me set that up. Class to do data. To do data consists of a complete, which is a bool, a due date, which is a optional, I can't spell, date time, both of which I now need to import from datetime, import datetime, from typing import optional, and a task description, which is a string and I can't spell. There we go. So that's the to do data. Let's do a to do as well. I've made a problem. Because I haven't defined to do yet. I shouldn't have saved the file. To do data. And the only addition is that it has an ID. Okay, so hopefully that's good. Excellent. So now we can also import and set up Quart-Schema. Actually, before I do that, no, I'll do that first. I'll do that next. So let's do that. From Quart-Schema, import Quart-Schema. We're also going to need to validate the data coming in and the data coming out. So validate request, validate response. Perfect. So let me add those to, where have I gone? Here. Add a request. So the request coming in should be to-do data, and the response should be a to-do. And I think because it's a creation route, let's return the 201 status code instead of a 200. Okay, so let's run the query. So await app.db. We need to get the ID back. So let's do fetch file, insert into to-dos, and we want to insert the complete, the due, and the task with the values. I think it's colon prefixed in databases. I think it uses SQL alchemies. Yeah, it does, which I really like. Makes it much clearer to know what you're filling in where. And task. And I want it to return the ID. And if you aren't familiar with this SQL styling, I think it's called SQL style.guide. Yeah, so this is the style guide I like to use for SQL. Basically, you have this river going down the middle, which makes it easy to see the kind of operators and the operands. It's not entirely like that, but roughly that's how I see it. Okay, carrying on. Okay, so it returns the ID. Need to pass it some values. So the values are, well, the same names actually, so I can just convert the data class that comes in into a dictionary and pass that to values. For that, I just need to import from data classes a function called asDict, and it's literally as it sounds. It will convert, because I'm using it on a to-do data class, it just converts this into a dict. Validate response is not defined. What have I? I can't spell. There we go. Okay, so that creates it. So that means we get the ID. So now we can return a to-do object with the ID equal to this ID, and the rest of it actually I can just get from this data. Okay, that looks like a create route. So let me just give that bit of documentation, create a new to-do. This allows to-dos to be created, stored. I'm not the best at writing documentation. It feels a bit derivative. Let's go back. Now, Quart-Schema should have created some automatic documentation for us, but it hasn't because I forgot to initialize Quart-Schema. So let me do that. Apply Quart-Schema to the app. Wait for it to reload. There we go. Excellent. So now I can create some to-dos. Let's try it out. First to do. Yay. Execute. Oh, it's errored. Why is it errored? To do object is not iterable. So this is quite a confusing error, which I think I'm going to change. What it's saying is that we've returned a to do object, but it doesn't know how to turn that into data to send. That's because we didn't match up the status code, and the validate response decorator is the one that converts the to do into something that Quart knows how to send. So I think I need to change this error because it's really confusing, but now it should work. Excellent. So the first to do has got ID 2. Now if I go back to the get route, it should tell us there's 2 to dos. Perfect. Okay, so now we've done the create. So now we need to do the read. So let's do a read. To dos. Just for clarity, even though this is a default, I'll just make it clear that this is the get route. And this response should be a list of to-dos, so I'll call that a to-dos object. So let's create that, data class to-dos. So this is literally just a list of to-do. Let me import list. So you may be asking here, why create an object for this? Why not just return the list of to-dos straight away? And I'll answer in two parts. One is like, I think it's bad practice because it used to always be banned in Flask. If you try to JSONify just a straight list, it'll tell you security risk. And it was, but it's not anymore because browsers have fixed that problem. The reason why I think it's bad practice though is because you can always add extra stuff to an object. So say I wanted this route to also return to done's, I don't know, I need to think of a better thing. I can just add it here and it won't break anything. However, if I was just returning the list, I wouldn't be able to do that. So anyway, that's my reason. And what's this? Get to-dos. That's what we're doing. It doesn't take any data, but it's going to return this to-dos. Okay, so if I say the result of a DB query, which is fetch many, many, which will be select ID complete due task from to-dos. That's it actually, isn't it? Good to think of it. And I can say that the to-dos are a to-do object. I think I can just pull it out of the row because everything has the same name. Row in results. Then I can return a to-dos. To-dos equals to-dos. That should work. Let's give it a bit of documentation. Get the to-dos. Fetch all the to-dos from the database. Okay, let's see if that's worked. Just wait for it to reload. Here we go. Try it out. No, error. What have I got wrong? It doesn't have a fetch many. What does it have then? Fetch all. Okay. Let's try that. There we go. No, errored again. Results is not for result row in result. Just wait till that's there we go. Excellent. So 2 to-dos because I created it twice, the first one failed. Excellent. So that's the get. I think we can make that a bit more interesting actually. That's add a filter so we can only we can choose whether to get the to-dos that are done or not done. That seems to be the common way. So we're going to validate the query string. So I'm going to use the query string as the filter. Let's add this here, data class to-do filter. Let's say complete. So query strings have to be optional. So we have to write it like this. And then I can add validate query string to do filter. And that will allow me to get a query args. So Quart-Schema will do this. So there's a query args, that's a to-do filter comes in. And then I can say if query args dot complete is none, then the then the user has decided not to provide the query string. But if they have, then I can run a slightly different query where complete equals complete and filter them out. So this one should be values equals, in fact I can do as dict again because I've called it complete, the query args. Perfect. Let's see if it's happy with that. No, not validate query string. Oops. What is it called then? I thought it was called that. I just can't spell. That looks like it's worked. Refresh. Okay. Oh, there's no description. I wonder why it's a drop down. Because now I can do it. So let's get all of them that aren't complete. There's none. Let's go of all of them that are complete. That's both of them. And that's not say, which is default everything. Although I should have added one that isn't complete. Let me do that quickly. Just so we can see. False. Not complete. That's worked. We can go back to this. Execute. There we go. Excellent. So that just makes this API just a little bit more useful to users. So let's keep going. So we've done create, we've done read, now we need to do update, and then we need to do a delete. So app.root to-dos. So the update I said earlier is going to be a put, which means I'm going to replace the entire to-do resource in a RESTful sense. And this needs to take in, therefore, the entire resource. So validate request takes in the to-do data, and this root is going to be by ID. So I'm going to put it in the URL rather than in the data, which again I think is more RESTful. And then again, I think the response should return the full to-do. Like when it's updated it should tell you this is the new to-do object. Update to-do. So this comes in as the ID, and we get the data in as the to-do data, and then we return a to-do. Perfect. Okay. So to update, we need to do await.db.execute update to-dos. How did that happen? I must have pressed the wrong key. There we go. And we want to set the complete to the complete, the due equal to the due, and the task equal to the task, where the ID is equal to the ID. Perfect. So let's see what the values are. It's a combination of the so let's do that. So the new to do is the ID equal to the ID and as the data. And then I can do the as dict trick again here to get the to do, and I can just return the to do. Nice. I think that does that. Update the identified to do. This allows the to do be replaced with the rest data. Okay, let's see if that refreshes. There we go. Reload, sorry. Refresh this. There's a patch. Here we go. Let's try it out. So the first one I'm going to change to new changed. Execute. Yeah, it says it's worked. Let's get them all and find out. Oh yeah, let's just reorder them. Perfect. Excellent. So now we've got the create, the read, the update, and now we need to do the delete. Root to-dos, methods, delete. Okay, this one doesn't actually need to take anything. I just need to identify it. I should have put the ID in. Delete to-do. Int. I think actually it doesn't need to return anything either. So let's say a string. I can return an empty string. And then we can say await app.db.execute delete from to-dos where ID equals ID. I'm going to put this on multiple rows. And then values equals ID. That should do it. And I'll just return a empty response, which I think is a 202 code. There we go, it's reloaded. There's a get, here's a delete. Let's try it. Let's delete that number one. It says it's worked. Try it again. It says it's worked again, which I think is fine. There's some, I think, debate about that. Let's just check. And there's no number 1. Excellent. So actually, that's it. We have a full CRUD RESTful API here for to-do objects. I'm just going to switch because the Redux UI I actually think is a bit cleaner, so we can see it all here. Oh, I forgot to put some documentation in again. Delete done to do. Delete the to do from the database. Okay, let me just see when this updates. There we go. So we get the to-dos, create one, delete it, and update, and even better, the get as a query parameter as well. So yeah, it's all quite nice. That's fairly quick. So that took us just a little over half an hour to go from absolutely nothing to a fully working and automatically documented RESTful API for to-dos in 125 lines of code. Well, with some bad doc strings in between. So I hope that was useful for you. If it was, or if you have any questions or whatever, then please let me know. As I said earlier, you can find me at pgjones.dev, and you can ask me questions on Twitter. I'm pdgjones, so there's an extra D. Somebody had already taken the one without the D, sadly. But yeah, thank you for listening.